Hi, everybody. My name is Lisa Allen. I am an adult services specialist at the Johnson County Library and also a part of the committee that helps plan our adult writing programs. And we are really, really excited that you're here with us tonight for this In Conversation with Anne-Marie Oomen and Ames Hawkins. Anne-Marie Oomen recently won the 2021 AWP Sue Silverman Award for Nonfiction for her newly released memoir, As Long as I Know You, the Mom Book. She wrote Lake Michigan Mermaid with Linda Nemec Foster, which was a Michigan Notable Book in 2019. The memoirs Love, Sex, and 4-H, which was a Next Generation Indie Award for Memoir, and Pulling Down the Barn, which was a Michigan Notable Book, and Uncoded Woman, which is a collection of poetry, as well as 7 plays and so many other books, essays, and poems. She edited Elemental, a collection of Michigan nonfiction, which was also a Michigan Notable Book. And she teaches at the Solstice MFA in Creative Writing program at LaSalle University in Massachusetts, Interlochen College of Creative Arts in Michigan, and at conferences throughout the country. Ames Hawkins is the author of the award-winning transgenre work of literary nonfiction, These Are Loved Letters. A professor of English and creative writing at Columbia College Chicago, Hawkins teaches and co-teaches courses in literature, creative writing, and cultural studies. So now I'm going to go off camera and turn the screen over to Ames and Anne-Marie, and I will be back at about 7:15 for our Q&A. So it's all yours, Anne-Marie and Ames.
Thank you. Thanks so much, Lisa. A special thank you to Johnson County Library for sponsoring this, and a warm welcome to all of you for attending this. It's a quirky subject we're going to talk about, but we are so excited. And also thanks to Ames for making time to do this. I really appreciate it. And Ames, did you want to step in here on anything?
I just wanted to say thank you to you, Anne-Marie, for inviting me to do this. It's when we had our little pre-conversation and when we met at the at AWP, which is the American Writers Conference, essentially. I just got really excited. It was great to meet you. And I look forward to reading. I have not yet read the newest, but I look forward to reading it. Just wanted you to know.
Oh, thank you so much. And I'm just going to do the brag moment and hold up your book right here. These are Love Letters, which is it's becoming one of my go-tos for inspiration. So thanks so much. We're going to start with, because this is such a unique subject, and it's kind of unusual, we're going to start with this word, ekphrasis, which I sometimes say, some people think it's a sin. It's one of the cardinal sins. It's not. Some people think it's a skin disease. It's not. It's a very, very old art form. And if we can bring up the slide, the little, we did a little PowerPoint, just to try and be professional here. So is that up? Can we have confirmation on that?
I think I can do, does this, I think we have the next one up there, because that'll show where we are. Now we're on the second page. Can you see that? There's a little red box around the one that we're looking at.
I have a green box, but I think that's it. Okay. Great. I'm gonna say that that's right, and if it's not, someone will
in the chat can let us know.
Yep. All right. So in ekphrasis, this is just really a simple way of understanding. I think something that so many of us do unconsciously. We are inspired to write or to think differently when we're in the presence of great art. And ekphrasis comes from this old word meaning ek, to out of, and phrasis, the root word of phrase, to speak. And so it means to speak out. And over time, it was a Greek word. And Ames is going to say in a minute a little bit about the rhetorical background for that. But basically, it meant to make or to help the silent speak, which was the painting or the piece of art to speak. In other words, to make something that was silent have voice. And that was incredibly important in terms of the Greeks to transcend this medium from language or from visual to language. So, Ames, want to add on to that?
That really does cover it. I mean, it's a Greek word, a Greek term. It will get used in the same way. Let's think about when people talk about logos, pathos. They talk about kairos, which is kind of like having kairos is a word people don't maybe know as well as logos, pathos, ethos in structuring language. But it's one of those Greek words that's borrowed from folks in what we would call the ancient traditions, and it just is exactly what you talked about, right? And the history of it is connected exactly as you said to mostly it has been the collaboration of a poet and a visual artist. The poem being something that is not a literal translation, but the piece that does the work that the visual art does, right? So one is using words as the medium, and one uses like paint as the medium. That's a way to think about it. And so they're sort of like translating in two different mediums, the same idea. That's kind of it. That's kind of its history. That you did a great job, and that's just a little bit more frosting.
Thank you. And that actually really helps a lot, because it's an impossible thing, these two things trying to talk to each other, and yet we do that all the time. And for those of you who can join us tomorrow, I will be continuing with that. And if we can go to the next slide, which is a couple of classic examples. Peter Bruegel's painting The Fall of Icarus, connected, of course, to the myth of Icarus flying and falling. That has a beautiful poem by W.H. Auden, Musée des Beaux-Arts. And I'll be talking about that one, and I'll be talking briefly also about Monet and the beautiful Liesl Mueller poem, The Doctor, Monet Refuses the Operation. And both of those are direct responses to the art forms. And then we will talk also about some disruptors, because although traditionally it stayed kind of in that realm of a poem responding to a piece of art, as it has evolved, particularly in this century, it is the idea of ekphrasis is just exploding, and it's making all kinds of changes, and it's crossing all kinds of boundaries, and it's including other kinds of arts talking to each other. And so I'm going to start just briefly before we come back to this, to talk about just briefly about my project, and then we'll get into what I'm really want to have more to say about is Ames's project. So because it's exploded into different kinds of border crossing and genre crossing and multi-genre experiences, I was interested, I've always been interested in it, but I was interested in pursuing it particularly during COVID. And during COVID, I was drawn to trying to write about trauma and resilience, because that was all around us. Examples of both were all around us almost constantly, and to some degree still are. We're just a little less sensitive to them now. I think we've kind of incorporated them into our lives. And during that time I met, and I knew him before, but had gotten to know better the documentary photographer Taro Yamasaki. And Taro Yamasaki was filming photography, making pictures, beautiful pictures, all during the 80s, 90s, and the aughts of powerful historical events that were disrupting the lives, particularly of children. And when we met and got to know each other, and he invited me to talk, to work with him a little bit, I went to his website, and you can do the same, Taro Yamasaki, and in his gallery, there were an immense number of pictures with a breadth and a range that were absolutely inspirational. And so but I didn't feel, as we don't now today, quite comfortable just directly writing about what the photograph suggested to me. So I went back to talk to him about the photograph and what evolved in this project. And I think Ames is going to be able to echo some of this, was a complex of not just writing directly from his photographs, but also interviewing him, studying the journalism that went with the photographs, and studying the history that surrounded his actually being there and the historical events that were happening at the time. So the image that you see on the right is an image of Elda Sanchez, who was in, need to see if it came up again. Yeah, Elda Sanchez, who was a child who was one of about 40 plus people who were on a truck traveling in Nicaragua during the war. And of course, they hit a landmine and most of the people were injured. And in this photograph, Taro is talking with her, has been talking with her for a while. And he asks Elda and her father if he may take this photograph. And Elda is willing to remove the prosthetic so that people can see. She knows that people will understand that war is bad for children if she does this. And so the story of the story becomes my way into something that I would not normally have experienced. Through his interviews, the actual the history of the Nicaraguan war, the history of these people, I felt that I could witness as witness, which is another way of border crossing. So that's all a kind of long way in to invite Ames to talk about alternatives, crossing genres, and the kind of disruption that can happen in ekphrasis today.
Well, thank you for that setup. I'm just going to reflect based on what you were talking about, some things that came up for me just in your description of your project. I think that the first thing that you were talking about is how we're sort of exploding this notion of what historically traditional ekphrasis, however we say it, what it might mean, right? We're sort of pushing at the boundary, and we can do that by engaging different arts and different literary, is it literature or could it be a film responding to a still image? Could it be still images responding to this, et cetera, et cetera? But for me, I think that, it invites a whole range of what we might think of as ekphrastic engagements, and think of those as practices and not necessarily do they have to be product driven, right? So and I invite this from anybody who is like a writer, just, you just want to explore and think about it. And that might be something, to also, I'd want to hear from you, Anne-Marie, at this point in your career, right? So now if you were writing mostly essay or memoir-esque type things, and now you're becoming interested in the visual. Okay, so it was, inspired by trauma, resilience, but there's something more there too. There's something more about how it is we all as creative people, you constantly evolve. You're not going to stay and do the same thing for years and years. You're just not. So this allows, if we allow ourselves this, right? That's what I'm thinking about. Like if we allow ourselves this kind of engagement as a practice without having to be good at it, I think it can yield a lot of good, right? A lot of things for us personally and for our work. So the second thing is, it reminded me as you were speaking that we want to do, okay, so a lot of times people think they're writing about the picture. And if we use that, we think about prepositions, this is something that I think about a lot. Prepositions. What work do prepositions do? So rhetoricians think about what work do words do. And there are some folks in creative writing. Francesca Randolph Short has written a whole article on prepositioning or method, preposition as method. So what if you wrote through the image? What if you wrote around the image? What if you wrote above the image, or whatever, instead of just about it? So how do you make use of prepositions to help you with this work? I think that there's a lot of yield there that gets you to mood and tone and all those things. And then the last thing I just wanted to end with was, in a lot of my courses, I invite students who may or may not be visual arts students to create a visual rendering of something, some idea, some concept, not a story, but a concept. And then we bring them to class and we lay them all out. And then I invite them to write the thing, the impulse, whatever they feel, that's between two. So it's not a direct ad. So I'm sort of, then I'm putting back on you, and we probably don't have lots of time for this, but how are you writing, I guess, beyond the image or between the images? It brings me around to that question, not just about them.
I love this, Ames. I just am so grateful to you for giving me these words: engagement, as opposed to, and practices, that it's a process, that it's not product driven, that it's constantly evolving, that it doesn't have to be perfect. And then you just blew me away with this propositions, because that's something my friend, the eco poet Alison Swan, is talking about so much, about, instead of writing about nature, why aren't we writing from nature? Why aren't we writing into nature? Why aren't we writing through nature? And I just think that you've hit the nail on the head as a way of allowing us to, what you said, practice. That to me is just gorgeous. And you just really excited me with that. So thank you.
So we can, what we're doing in your
class. What you're doing in your class is so cool. Yeah. So let me just move on, because I know we're trying to cover so many things, because we're so excited about this. And I want to go to the next slide. I hope you can all see this one. And this one is really odd, because it doesn't look like much when you start out. On the left is a copy of a page from a World War II letter that my father wrote to my mother. And I think it's the original, the first page, I think, is dated 1943. He is in Africa. He's following General Patton's army. He will end up eventually in Sicily, and he'll do 2 tours during this war. This is an early letter in which he is sending it to my mother, and when it arrives, and when I opened it and unfolded it, there were holes in these letters. They were cutouts, and the cutouts were apparently the censors had gone in with these razors and actually took the time to cut out all the places, and any reference that would basically blow their security in any way if the letter were stolen or lost or misplaced or got into the wrong hands. And it shocked me, because I'd heard, of course, we'd all heard about things like this, but to actually experience this letter in this way, and having the letters in the first place was a miracle. To have 14 letters from my father from World War II to my mother. And to tell you the truth, it's what it makes me most acutely aware of is the monotony of soldierdom, and what the monotony of being a warrior in those, it's the hurry up and wait thing, and then you die. And no, I didn't mean it like that, but often there's a risk. And the letters were fascinating to begin with. But when I came to the cutouts and felt the absence of place and the silence, the enforced silence in the cutouts, I began to treat them then as ekphrastic objects. Because that absence in something that was so tangible and tactile and that had been handled, and the paper changes as my father's stationery, as the war stationery changes, what's available to the soldiers changes as the 2.5 years passes. And all of that becomes inspirational to me. And so I came to this idea, and this is why I really wanted Ames in this conversation, of epistolary ekphrasis. Epistles as letters, you know, the old epistles of the Bible. Well, epistolary is anything that has to do with letters. So the idea of an ekphrasis, a response to a letter, began to fascinate me as one of those ways we might cross borders. And then, of course, I found this book, Ames's beautiful book, These Are Loved Letters, in which she is also talking about her father's letters to her mother. And I'm reading along, absolutely fascinated, and I come to this page where her father has written to her mother on a cleaning cloth. Now, Ames, interrupt me if I've got this wrong. And the entire letter is on this cloth, and this is where the boundary crossing, the object as inspiration, which kind of explodes, really starts to happen for both writer and reader. Because when I read her talking about that, I have the same feeling I have when I experience my dad's cutouts. And I also have this feeling of texture, discovery from scent. Cleaning cloth smells entirely different from a letter, a page. The sensation of touch gets involved, and I'm suddenly out in the sea thinking all these thoughts. So Ames, this is where I really want you to step in and talk about how you treated these letters as objects of inspiration.
Yeah, thanks for that setup. So I just want to start by saying that you know, this sort of like, I never intended to write about these letters at all, because I didn't know they existed until my mother handed them to me. And they're a little discreet collection. And you know, whether or not you all, the really quick synopsis of this book is, it's essentially what I'm trying to do is provide an exploration of how love letters work. And so in order to do that, I wanted to enter the consideration of them as object, as argument, as object, as relational, as communication. There's so many different facets to this, right? So the thing is, and then the story unfolds. The story unfolds of these two people who got married very quickly, and then were married for 24, almost 25 years. And then then they divorced. My father came out. He contracted HIV, and he died years later of AIDS. And that's kind of like, that's the story. That's what I thought the story was about. But the story, that's the background to the story. That's the thing that kind of has hooks that are emotionally interesting for people to move through. But what I was doing was exploring how letters work. And I actually did bring the actual letters here so people can see that they're real objects. And I think it's really important to understand that my father was a visual artist. He was a budding visual artist at the time, sort of screwed around painting things all the time, you know, doing this. And his career was as an interior designer, which it requires, you know, a lot of skill for that. But these, I will show you this number 6, just so you can sort of understand, right? So this is the letter, the actual envelope. My mother ripped this one across the end. So there's all these other ways, and what you can't see is that if you hold it up to the light, you can sort of see that the letter is down in here, and I've only ever pulled this out a few times. And this is this cloth. So when you unfold it, and I have to be careful because I think it will rip if I'm not really careful. Yeah. I've actually ironed it a couple times so that we could get good images of it. But I'm not going to iron it ever again. So then when you open it, this might be taking a little too much time. Yeah, see, it's
No,
like,
I want to see it. I want to see it. We all want to see it.
so it's like this thing, right? So what he was doing as a visual artist was appropriating this flat surface as paper. And then now it just smells like old. It doesn't have a cleaning cloth smell to it at all. But basically, this is a Swiffer. This will become a Swiffer 50 or 60 years from now. That's what this is, which is kind of an interesting thing to understand. And as he says in the letter, which I don't talk a lot about it, he got it from his roommate's mom came and cleaned their apartment for them because hashtag, I guess, 1966. To set these guys up in their apartment, and she brought those with her, and he was just like, oh, this is interesting, and then he wrote that letter on there. And so I guess for me, I'm really quickly, just to how I approach these is, as a rhetorician, I think as much about form as I think about content. So there's what's in the letters, there's always what's in the letters, but the form of the letter itself does so much more work just as the thing it is and what it means to people. And that was part of my investigation. And it's a technology too. So rhetoricians care about like this is a technology. This pencil is a technology. It enables us to communicate, to write. All the kinds of technologies that enable us to communicate, a rhetorician would be interested in. So computers, yeah, all that stuff too, but these are also technologies. And then the post office is a technology. And so when you are thinking about how does that work, one of the things that I did, and now I'm just going to segue a little bit to creative practices, is that I wrote a ton of letters that don't appear anywhere in this book. I wrote letters, and people would say, did you write letters to your father? Not really. I wrote letters to the other, I look at collections of love letters between women authors, and I wrote letters to them. Or I would write a letter to, there is one letter in the book to this imaginary elf that my father made up, Elf in the Blue, was at the end, whatever. I wrote a letter to that mythical creature, that mythical idea. And so when I write these letters, sometimes I would pull chunks of them and they would end up in the book. And sometimes they would just teach me about what it means to write a letter as exploration of the self as much as it is trying to reach another person. And that's good enough on that right now, I think, so that we make sure that we leave time and everything like that. But that's kind of, it's really an exploration of form and content. And I think that a lot of people that are writers, they don't even think about like the typeface that's being used, the book that, unless it's like you want it to be pretty, but you're not thinking about what work that does. The book, the table of contents does a lot of work. It's a technology. You know what I mean? It's a technology. So is an index. And that codex is a book. Codex is the fancy word for book. To flip through like this in linear fashion. And these letters have linearity to them, but I wouldn't know it without the technology of the postmark. Or if he put a date. And he put dates on most of them because that was still the practice. But anyway, and it kind of explodes when you start thinking about email and whose is it and what can you do with it? Anyway.
Thank you for that. I just love this idea as objects being something relational, this and letters particularly, because there is automatically a relationship in it, but you also have a relationship to the object itself. And that to me is a really powerful part of this process. I am very curious. I want to talk to you more about this idea that you wrote, you wrote letters to the letters, or almost like that, you know, that not only was it an ekphrastic or an epistolary response, an ekphrastic response, but it was epistolary response to the letters themselves. That to me, why letters? Why not poems, stories? What was it about the writing letters to the letters that drew you? Can you talk a little bit about that?
I mean, to be honest, it's because I've always been a letter writer. And I think that my interest in this I think that this caught my attention because I have written letters. I have a long history practice, again, in the book, chapters of it, or, you know, we'll look at that. But I've always been fascinated by letter writing. I really like letter writing. I like the way that it feels to go into the space of writing. And, you know, it marks us in time for, you know, before phones and things like before cell phones and things like that. If you had a practice with that with people, if you still maintain those practices, which I do, they're not as intense as they used to be. I think that responding and working with and within the form, since I was interested in the form, I wanted to see how the form works. So in order to understand how it worked, I'd have to work with it. And going to yet another form may not give me that insights for that. It might give me some insights or different insights, but it wouldn't be as exhausted, I guess. And since I am also a scholar and researcher, in a way, it's research. It's not, it's creative practice as research, not just creative practice. Not to say that there's a just there, but you know what I'm trying to hedge there with the words, not right. It's thinking about how creative practices allow us to engage in scholarly research in addition to creative research.
Right. You know, this reminds me when I'm the Taro project, which is called Unguarded Moments, is now at Wayne State University Press. And of course, we had to do, all of your talk here is reminding me of this. We had to do some kind of rudimentary preliminary design in order to showcase how the photographs, the oral histories, and the poems were spiraling around each other, even though we're not designers. And it seemed to me that that was a really important part of our thinking, our practice, because in that we began to reshape connections and to break down the silos of those four cornered research strategies that I'd mentioned earlier. In your book, Ames, you have, and I think I popped up the next slide, you designed the chapters with each chapter opens, I'm just gonna, if it's not up on the, with the front of a letter.
Front of an envelope.
Envelope, yes, the envelope. And each chapter closes with that envelope. And in between, it's interesting, you did not feel an obligation to print the entire letter in most cases. You used fragments of this letter in the way almost a collage artist would use if they were remaking might use many different photographs or paintings or images to put together. And this was kind of an inspiration for me because I thought, oh, these are things we can suggest to designers. And then later I read that your partner is a designer. So I wonder if you could talk a little bit about the process of taking these letters into this realm of creating an art form in the book itself.
Yes, absolutely. So from the very beginning, I wanted this to be a highly visual project. And so actually, in this whole thing took me at least 10 years to create. The thing is, when you work when you're working beyond, and I'm going to just say it this way, beyond a usual form, a usual artistic form, like the essay or the memoir or whatever, this is, kind of made up. It's going to take longer because you have to find your way to the form you're going to use. I could have made it linear, but it wouldn't allow me to feature the letters as they were. I also wanted the book itself to evoke feeling of being with letters without each chapter reading like a letter or having it be an epistolary book. It's not an epistolary book because that's telling the story through letters. So I don't have too much of the letters in them because it's not telling the story through the letters. The letters are kind of incidental. They're a little monotonous and boring. There's some key spots. And so since I have that knowledge and you reread them, you're like, okay, I'm going to pull this out. I'm going to pull that out. It was designed. So I was struggling with the form, thinking through all these different ways of doing it. I had anyway, that's a whole different story. But then in the person who designed the book, who is my spouse, I didn't really know her that well because this was like 6 or 7 years ago. Just asked, so asked me a question, like, because I was doing these weird forms. She's like, well, why that? And that had me go, oh. And so it was like, make it simpler and to make it more complicated. Then I found out subsequently that she had an incredible experience as a pen paler from like age 11 or 12 to into college. So she understood what I was getting at here visually. And we negotiated. I will put a big shout out to Wayne State University Press for allowing her to be the designer on this project so that we could do what we wanted to do. And we wanted to make sure that people understood the way that a letter can be a gift, that the letter has little hidden treasures in them. So some of these chapters have little sentences along the bottom that are kind of strung across pages. She wanted to make it visually engaging every single time. And in the book, the way that it's constructed then is I was like, okay, there are 20 letters. There are going to be 20 chapters. I'm going to have 10. How long should the book be? This long? Okay, there'll be 10 pages per chapter. I want them to be just like mimicking letterness. The chapters, if you've really noticed, they become more dense in the body. So they're opening, there's much more space in the first few. And then they become more and more dense, the heavier material. And then they kind of lighten up. And the last chapter kind of works like a PS, like a postscript with an actual PS in the last chapter. And that is maybe invisible to people, but it allowed me, that's parts of my dad's quilts. It allowed me to figure out what I was going to do. And I must have written 80 or 90,000 words, and there are about 55,000 words in this. So this idea that you overdo and then you choose what you're going to do and how you're going to have somebody come along. And just like any letter anyone writes can have a bunch of different kinds of writing in it, right? And you don't have to make sense, and it doesn't have to be linear. It can be whatever you want to put in there. By the same token, I wanted to make sure that there was enough to keep the reader understanding what was going on and they were never lost. So some early versions would flummox really smart readers, and I was like, okay, that's too experimental. I don't want it to be experimental. I want people to be able to read it, but I want it to be a new form, a different form.
I just love what you're saying about new form and different form, because to me, letters can be, they're so precious. They are gifts, and they have that singular audience. You're always talking to one person, and yet the very fact that you are transforming them and placing them on this medium, which is going to last longer than a conversation and can last a very, very long time, indicates a sense of audience. Yes, it is the technology by which your message is going to be carried to someone else, but there's also the awareness that even after the person receives that, that is a tangible object that continues in time. And so it's also got that kind of sense of a potential second audience always in its presence. And that to me is another powerful gesture about the letter, and another way that I like thinking about it in terms of ekphrasis. I love the design of this book. I want everybody to be able to see, as she's right, and they're right, as it goes through, Ames talks about how it changes, and there are incredible patterns at the end of this, where your partner has taken the letters, I don't know if you can see, and made a pattern with it.
Because we were talking about the quilts, all the quilts my dad made. She was using for inspiration quilt patterns. And that's one of them that we have up here, on the last slide here. Yeah, that's one.
Put that up for just a second. You can see right. That pattern.
You were talking about working with, and this is, to me, that's real collaboration. Real collaboration for me is when you're learning from somebody else. You're not just there to do your part and pop, that's my expertise, I'm out. You're learning from the other person, and the dialogue, your conversation is going to, it's actually called dialogic collaboration. So through dialogue, you're going to create something you never, ever could have done alone. Just not possible. So, and again, I think this is like a mind-blowing concept for a lot of writers, because they, writing doesn't happen unless you sit and do it, usually by yourself. However, there's a lot of ways that writers could do more with collaborating with other artists in order to, really get their own creativity going. It still might be primarily, I still say I primarily function in words, but I will think about and engage with visual artists quite often, because that gives me a different way of thinking about how words can possibly work.
Thank you. I'm just thrilled with this, and I am now very curious about moving this into how our audience members may have felt about their letters or letters in their lives. And I don't know, I still, I have my father's war letters, but I also have many letters from my mother. They tend to be documents of ordinary life, which at one time I would read them and I just put them aside. And now in some ways I go back and I just cherish that she had an ordinary life. There was sacredness in the ordinary. And I find that quite interesting. My judgment has changed. And perhaps that goes back to the idea that a letter, or working with a letter, or responding to a letter, can change one, can be part of the transformative moment. So I'm very curious if there are audience members out there who would like to address this idea of how they respond to letters. And if you have questions or just want to list comments, we'd be most grateful for the interaction. I see Lisa may have come back on here. Can you go ahead and...
I am here. Yes. Great. And it is time. We do have a couple of questions so far, and what you just said is a perfect lead into the first one. Someone has asked, has working with letters made you more or less likely to write letters to friends and family?
For me, it's made me more likely to write them, because there's that sense of the texture, the tactile quality of them. I am not always a good letter writer because I tend to be too busy. I rush forward and I forget and things fall to the wayside. But I have, since encountering my father and my mother's letters, I've tried to write more often. I've also tried to include things in letters so that the envelope becomes, at some point, Ames talks about the doors in the letters being kind of doors or openings and closings. The opening of the letter, that's what they talk about. And I am aware of putting things, maybe silly little things like a sprig of lavender or some unusual little addition to the letter so that the container has to hold even more. Ames, what do you think?
Yeah. Yes, absolutely. And that's that gets at the idea that it's a gift, right? And that there's a surprise inside, that there's something, that is going to, and maybe this is also part of the ekphrastic impulse too, is to try to really expand your sensorium, the way that you have senses. And so a letter can do that, right? How many people know, people smear cologne on it, or, they'll put their lipstick, or like you'll kiss it. And that's right. That's not just, that's like a very visual understanding of body, the physical body. So there's a body of a letter, and then there's the physical body. There's the hands that hold it, that write it, that touch it, and all that kind of thing. And I absolutely do still write to people. And it's actually part of my writing practice. Like if I'm having a really hard time, like writer's block, I get through that by writing somebody a letter. I'm not writing about what I'm going to write about. I'm just like, let's get some words going. And it's always easier for me to write somebody else than even write in a journal. I do a little bit of journaling, but letter writing is how I've mostly done that kind of work, I think. But
it's
yeah,
that
definitely.
Singularity of audience, I think, that really shakes loose. I can see my mother, or I can see my sister, or I can see the person.
And I find it way less stressful than writing for an audience. I always write to an audience of one, no matter what I'm writing. And that audience might shift, right? So in my book, there's what we might call more traditional memoir scenes. And then there's theory, there's more scholarly writing. And so I picture different people as the reader for those every single time, in order to call up what is going to be required for them to be engaged. That's not the same thing for every person at all. And you can totally read this, like skipping all that. You can decide what you're going to read in this. It's not quite choose your own adventure, but kinda. And I wanted it to be that way so people could move through it. Yeah. See a second question.
We do have a second question. Someone has asked, how do you feel about the trend to online communication? Does the almost lost art of letter writing make you sad, or do you see potential for future generations to mine the tools that we use now?
That's a really hard one. You want to take that first, Ames?
I can start there. Sure. Well, online, this world that we're in is here to stay. The book is not going anywhere either, and neither is the letter. And so really what it comes down to is that when I talked about the letter as technology, that kind of blew people's minds then, to have a post office that you could aerogram something. I know that's hard for us to think about now, but every new technological shift kind of, it does something else. I think that I'll put it this way too. I teach a course called Artist Letters and Mail Art, MAIL, just so we're clear. And it's artists and writers writing to each other, and then there's a whole form of art that is letter art. It's called mail art, epistolary art, and I could go off. That's one of the things I researched for this book, and it never came in. It's just kind of like what I know about and think about. I'll tell you what, students are super interested and hungry for it because it's not a thing that they're taught anymore in the same way. It's not every student, but every student, when just sort of say, has anybody written a love letter? That's pretty much everyone. By the time they're in college, it's everyone. They don't mail them. So the difference is they're not using the post office, but people understand a letter, what its affordances are, how it's used, and love is one of those things. And so that's one of the places that we start. I also saw a comment from somebody else talking about the relationship between healing and letters. That's a topic that we do in my class as well. How do they help us really get in touch with ourselves, our feelings, how we feel about our bodies? There's all kinds of books written about like writing a letter to your hair or your teeth or your whatever. And students, they really respond very well to that stuff. So for me, I mean, I think every one of these technologies that's communicative has a role to play. I am personally on a personal crusade to have my students write letters more because it's a sustained attention to themselves that totally, Anne-Marie, you're right. I mean, I think it's Anais Nin who talks about how you're never not writing to the grand audience when you write a letter. You're never not writing to the beyond you. However, that's way different than social media. So the letter is a different kind of a space that I want students to know in themselves, to know through themselves, and that's not there. They have an assignment where they're always asked to write a letter to your future self at the end of the year. I think that that's so overdone, so that a lot of students don't quite even get that there's more to a letter than that as the assignment.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, it feels to me like a letter starts with a sense of intimacy, whereas writing on social media starts with a sense of the public or the a common audience, a universal audience. It doesn't have that. It may sound intimate, but it doesn't have a real singular intimacy. That's how I would distinguish it. I love what you said about the sustained attention of a letter. Some of my students were fascinated and really enjoyed when we did a postcard, love letters to the lakes. We were doing some water activism, and they weren't into writing love letters to the lake, but they could write a love postcard to the lake. And that was a smaller chunk, and it was associated with the visual. They could flip it over and make their little postcard image on the other side. And that was much more successful. And so I appreciate what you're saying about they need the practice, or maybe we all need the practice in sustained attention. We're all partially attending right now. We have some more questions. Let's see.
We do not. Well, wait, we might. Hold on. We do. 1 second. There is, and we have 4 minutes left. Is it ekphrastic to have a Valentine postmarked from a town by that name?
Is it ekphrastic to have a Valentine post? That seems to me lovely coincidence.
Yeah, technically no, but it's cool.
I think if then you build something around that, then the whole idea of an ekphrastic Valentine from a town named Valentine, there's something beautiful that you might build from that. So yeah.
Yeah, that's awesome.
And then this is more of a comment, but Beverly says, I love the way that Ames's book is constructed. I recently found a letter from my grandfather to his grandparents written from Europe in World War I. I gleaned much from the letter. He was literate and had good cursive handwriting. He was a good writer, and he missed home cooking and so on.
Oh.
Yeah, that's so great.
The insight into that, just that little bit. He had good cursive handwriting, and he missed home cooking. I mean, isn't there it starts to unfold, doesn't it? Right there, you could feel his longing and the desire that might drive a response. So I think that's
I think this talks about what you said, Anne Marie, about a way in, right? It might be hard for someone to talk about their feelings, but it's easy about missing home cooking than it is something more vulnerable.
And that gives us, we who are reading, a way in also to the response, to letting that image percolate up of, okay, is it the tuna casserole, or is it the Sunday pot roast, you know? All of that.
Yeah. And there's something about what Beverly just wrote there. There's something about the way that we can respond and write about, writing about the letter, or just trying to translate what you got out of it. That line of, it's gone now, but he was
a good writer.
Yeah, but before that, it was something, and he had cursive or some cursive. It's like, it sounds like the first line of a short story. You know, so you've got the makings of the character right there for, you know, I guess the point is that there's a lot of inspiration inside these little packages that you can pull out that have nothing to do with whatever that actual content is. That gives you a, he mentioned that his base cooked for 10,000 men at a time. Yeah. So there's all these details, right? So there's details that are facts, then there are feelings, then that's what I'm saying. We bounce around in a letter so much, and you can cover a lot of ground in a little bit of space. You also can get highly redundant in a letter, and it says the same thing over and over and over again. The letters of who wrote The Lonely Well, John, now sort of, I'll get it. Well of Loneliness. Radcliffe Hall. So Radcliffe Hall's letters are just, they're tough to get through because it's so much. There's so many words that don't say a lot, but the person was trying to get inside that feeling of being intimate, wanting to be intimate with the other person, who was sort of, it was a little bit unrequited-y. There was a little grasping. So you can feel, you can get the sensation from that. It's really cool. Anyway,
well, thank you. I'm just thrilled with this. Thanks so much. Yeah, Lisa, go ahead.
I am the messenger who has to say that it's 7:30 and it's time for us to say goodnight. We try to end on time, so we respect everybody's schedules. I do want to put in a plug that Anne Marie is going to have a craft talk tomorrow night, same time. Same platform, where she will get a little bit more into the nuts and bolts of ekphrasis and epistolary and writing in general. So it'll be a little bit more hands-on, I believe, and we encourage you all to come. And from Johnson County Library, thank you for being here, for being patrons, and thank you to Anne Marie, Oomen and Ames for being our presenter this evening. I'm sure everybody is clapping in their own homes. Good night, everybody.
Good night, and thank you.